Hello, and welcome to the WPC virtual webinar series. My name is Eli Pollard. I'm the Executive Director at the World Parkinson Coalition. And this program has been a long time coming, starting back in 2019 at the 5th World Parkinson Congress in Kyoto, Japan. There were a lot of conversations about resources and services for people with young onset Parkinson's disease. And that conversation seeded this idea for a course. We actually took that information in 2019 and offered a live in-person pre-Congress course at the 6th World Parkinson Congress in Barcelona, Spain in 2023. There were a lot of people who could not join us in person in Barcelona, and they let us know that they really wanted access to these courses. And so because of their requests and because of interest within the community, we are now offering this course live virtually for everyone to access. So it's important to note that this entire program is being offered 9 talks in all. They were all designed by people with Parkinson's, particularly people with young onset Parkinson's, designed for other people with YOPD or people who want to learn about YOPD issues. You're going to hear this week about a wide range of topics, from parenting in Parkinson's to exercise in Parkinson's to when and how to make a disclosure about your diagnosis. The topics are wide and varied, and our faculty are true leaders in the Parkinson's world. With 20 faculty members, 12 of them are people who actually live with young onset Parkinson's disease themselves. Other faculty are care partners, movement disorder doctors, we have a nurse, we have a physical therapist, and others. It's really an incredible lineup, and you're in for a great treat. And if you miss a session, don't worry, we're recording them all, and they will be available for viewing as archive talks in the coming week. I want to thank Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma America for supporting the WPC and bringing this program to you. We would not be here today without their support. So thank you, Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma America. And lastly, I want to thank our faculty for sharing their knowledge, their experience, their expertise, and to all of you for joining us today and for supporting the WPC and our work throughout the year. Thank you, and enjoy the session.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the World Parkinson Coalition's virtual YOPD program. My name is Rebecca Gifford, and I'm your moderator for the next hour. I'm joined by our presenter, Dr. Sonia Mather. Our session today is on parenting with Parkinson's. We're both very pleased to have you join us today. If you are not already aware, the 9 talks in this virtual YOPD series each fall under one of 3 categories, starting with the individual track. These talks focus on the individuals living with Parkinson's. There's the in relation track. These talks focus on the importance of relationships since the impact of PD is so broad. And then there's the medical track. These talks focus on the medical management of Parkinson's with a focus on YOPD. If you miss a session this week, never fear, because we are recording them and they will be available by Monday of next week for your viewing. So during the session, you will notice a box on the right side of the screen with 3 tabs, a question tab where you can submit questions at any time, a resource tab where you can download or open various resources mentioned in the sessions. We will have one connected to our session as well, and a poll tab where you may be invited to complete a poll in a session. Not all sessions will have polls, but if they do have one, that tab is where it will show up. And there will be a tab for our session. So fun. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsor, Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma America. We would not be here today without their generous support. So let's get started. We are here to talk about parenting with Parkinson's, a topic that is particularly meaningful and specific to the YOPD community. It's one that comes up a lot when I'm talking with my friends in the YOPD community. We're both going to introduce ourselves in more detail in a minute, but before we get into discussion, we want to acknowledge that every child and parent is different. This session is intended to be a forum to discuss the challenges, joys, and lessons to be learned as parents facing Parkinson's, as both a person living with Parkinson's and as a co-parent of a person with Parkinson's. We don't claim to be parenting experts, and as all parents, we're learning as we go. So we are excited to hear what questions and comments those in attendance may have to share with us that we can learn from as well. So along those lines, we also invite you to answer a poll question. So you can find a tab to do this off to the right of your screen. And the question that we'd like to ask, and that'll show up a little bit later in the session, what is the most prominent emotion you feel when you think about parenting with Parkinson's or co-parenting with a person with Parkinson's? What emotions come up for you? And then we're in a few minutes, then we'll, for everyone who's answered the questions, we'll reveal the results in a word cloud later in the presentation, and that'll kick off some of our conversation. So who are we? So I'm Rebecca Gifford. I'm wife, co-parent, and partner in Parkinson's to Larry Gifford, who was diagnosed at age 45. So for 6 years, we co-hosted the podcast When Life Gives You Parkinson's. I'm a writer, workshop facilitator, and communications professional, as well as a speaker and Parkinson's and care partner advocate. Larry and I live in Vancouver, British Columbia with our 15-year-old son, Henry, and he was 8 years old when Larry was diagnosed. And our presenter today is Dr. Sonia Mather. Welcome, Sonia. Would you like to introduce yourself and start our presentation?
Sure, Rebecca, thank you. I don't know if your pictures showed up. I was trying to share your lovely family photos.
Oh, are we seeing the slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, there you
are.
are.
There they are. Yeah, that's my lovely family, and you can see
my favorite. My favorite is the one on the far left with you and Henry walking. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, my mother-in-law took that. She's really good at kind of capturing those little small moments, and I love that picture. So thank you for recognizing that.
It's gorgeous. So thank you, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be with you here again. And it's a pleasure actually to be doing this with you again, because we had done it together in Barcelona, and it's such an important topic. As Rebecca mentioned, my name is Sonia Mather. I'm a family physician, Parkinson's advocate, and most importantly, wife and mother. I always wanted to be a mother. And I was overjoyed when I found out I was expecting my first daughter. But what I didn't realize is that the tremor that also appeared during my pregnancy would soon be diagnosed as an incurable progressive neurodegenerative disease. So at the age of 28, soon after I went on to have two more daughters, this diagnosis also came into my life. So parenting these beautiful girls and the challenges that it brings beyond the normal stress of raising children, because that is always a stressful situation sometimes, doing the right thing. It's a topic that's really important to me, and I know it's important to you as well. So I feel privileged to be able to have this discussion with everyone today. We know that those of us that are diagnosed are not the only ones affected. The whole family unit struggle with this challenge, and particularly the most vulnerable are children. Some of the changes that are associated with our disease can alter both our appearance and our abilities, and this can be a monumentally difficult adjustment for both, not for us as people affected, but also for our loved ones. So let's start today's discussion with how do we talk to children about a PD diagnosis. I think there may be a level of fear associated with changes that they see in their parents, as I said, and grandparents, particularly if it's not acknowledged or it's left unexplained. And that's why when the timing is right, it's important to have that conversation. And Rebecca and I both feel, I think I can speak with you, that this is a discussion, as she mentioned. We'd like to hear from you as well, as best as we can in this format. Because first and foremost, it's important to remember that each family is different, as Rebecca said. There's no set age at which a diagnosis of Parkinson's should be discussed. It depends on the maturity level of the child. It depends on other life circumstances that might be going on at the time, stressors that the family might be experiencing, and also your own innate feeling of when the correct time is, that intuition that you have that it's ready and it's time to share this information with them. But there are some other sort of general guidelines that I've sort of experienced and heard from our community about that I think are important to take into consideration. Use as you see fit, actually. The first is be honest in your disclosure. And that's because children are really intuitive. They often sense there's something wrong, and the stories they make up in their mind and head can often be much worse than what the reality is. And it makes a child sort of uncomfortable if they feel a parent or loved one is hiding something from them. This is especially true when our children are young, when they may not be able to verbalize this concern, may come out in their behavior. When older, when they're able to clearly articulate their concerns, there's sometimes questions that they aren't so comfortable asking. But regardless, discussing things honestly and openly, I feel, from the adult side in the relationship is important. And of course, again, how much you disclose and how that communication develops over time is unique to each family. I found that with my own girls, it was really important for us to, when they were old enough, to identify the shakiness, what that meant. And it was interesting. We had just come back from a charity event in New York, and we had sat the girls down and we said, do you know why Mama and Dada go to these charity events every year? And my middle one, who was only about 6, she said, because you have Parkinson's disease. So she had picked that up from somewhere. And my older one looked at her and said, what do you mean? So again, it's the children have, but children are generally very intuitive in terms of knowing something's wrong. Rebecca, how did you disclose Larry's diagnosis to your son?
We did sit down. He was 8 years old at the time, so we kept it very simple. We just opened up the conversation, told him very basically what it meant, and that it was directly related to some of the symptoms that he had noticed as well. Because one of the reasons that Larry went for a diagnosis was that Henry pointed out, I notice when you reach your arm or you hold certain things in this way, you seem to be shaking a lot. Why is your hand shaking? And so it was the last of a few things that he had noticed. So he said, well, connected to that, here's what it is. And then we kept it very simple and then allowed him to ask questions as he was ready. He didn't have a lot of questions to begin with. He also has he's developmentally a little different. He's neurodivergent. So we keep our conversations a little bit younger than his age, and then allow him to kind of advance it as he's ready. So it was a conversation, but again, very simple. And then as he's ready, we check in every once in a while, but as he's ready to talk about it, or has questions about it, then we fully embrace those opportunities and say, okay, here's another way to give you maybe a little bit more information as he's ready. And that's just continued over the years.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that covers a lot of what is on this list. I mean, the second thing is as you mentioned, you need to use words that are directed to their developmental or their educational level. Trying to sort of limit the complexity of your explanations, but do try and educate them with some of the more common technical terms. And that might be the physician in me. I like to make sure that the kids understand new words when it comes to health and the human body, but obviously take into consideration their age and maturity level when deciding what information to share with them. And you quite rightly pointed that out as being something that guided your discussions. The next one, oops, sorry about that. The next one is to always express hope or try to express hope. I used to put this up on the slide and say always express hope, and then I realized that's not always possible. We're human beings. We're not going to express hope all the time. But what I mean by this is that children are remarkably resilient, and their perspective is usually far more optimistic than our own. So what I mean to say is honor that optimism. We could learn a little bit from them, truthfully, in terms of that positive perspective, but make that your main focus, even if you sometimes don't feel that way. I'm not advocating dishonesty here, but children rely on reassurances from their trusted adults in their lives. And their reactions will often mirror the family's attitude. If you think about a toddler, for instance, if a toddler falls, they'll look at their mother or father. And if the parent freaks out, then they will inevitably cry, right? Whereas if the parent says, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, you're okay, they'll often pick themselves up and toddle on, unless they're really hurt, of course. So that kind of reaction from your child at any age will often be a lot dependent on how you face the challenges and how you express yourself when it comes to the future. So it's not an easy thing to choose that optimism and hope, but in interactions with children, especially, it's often a good idea to try and attain as much as you can most of the time. The next one is keeping the lines of communication open. And again, you mentioned that Henry, as he has questions, he feels comfortable asking those. And that's really important because the disease has manifestations that will change with time as it progresses. And as a child's understanding and insight will also change with age. So new questions or worries may arise, and therefore it's imperative that a child feel comfortable in continuing the conversation when they're concerned. And creating that open environment is something that's been very helpful in my family. Empowering them. Having a loved one with a chronic illness is a lot for a child to handle, and sometimes they can't help but start feeling helpless, especially when like this, it's not something that they can control. And that helplessness can sometimes be balanced with giving them concrete ways in which they can have some measure of control in the situation, some way that they can help out, be it with daily tasks such as housework or more proactive tasks, which are a little bit more conceptual, like fundraising or raising awareness. But by giving them specific ways to empower themselves is really helpful that I found anyway in our family. Have you found that as well, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think that Henry really likes when he's involved in things, especially our larger projects, as much as he's comfortable, especially fundraising and other things. And he has been involved in some funny. He's a great fundraiser for our local organization here as well. But he also did the Spinning Wheels tour that was here in Canada. That was the bike tour that went across Canada. And he did a couple of legs here starting in Vancouver. And that's directly related. It was all with mostly with people with Parkinson's that he was writing with. And he really felt empowered by that. Like he was able to help, he was able to do some things. He was raising awareness, he was contributing. And that was very empowering for him. So I love that point.
That's great. Yeah, he is. I've heard um, very good things about Henry's involvement.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And the last part of this slide anyway, is accessing helpful resources. Explore the marketplace for appropriate books. I've written a couple, but there are many, many. For this particular talk, I went and did a deep dive on children's literature in the field of Parkinson's, and are quite a few resources out there in terms of books written by parents or grandparents about the disease. So exploring the marketplace for appropriate books on Parkinson's disease that are geared to your child's age group. The one I wrote this one was for toddlers and preschoolers, and this one was more for kids of school age. So there are different levels of understanding that the books need to be directed towards. And if you find that your child is having a hard time coping with the diagnosis, then seeking counseling is also always a good option. I mean, see what your community or your physicians can help out with, and getting someone that maybe is involved with the disease in some way or has a clearer understanding may allow your child to see someone that can maybe help out. So never be afraid of that resource as well. It's also and as you and I had discussed when we were planning the session out, Rebecca, so important to not minimize the stress that this illness can cause. The impact on our kids is sometimes it really is actually somewhat unavoidable. But if possible, it's important to cultivate an environment where kids are able to share their fears and their concerns, and sometimes their embarrassments. We have to be honest about that.
Mhm.
My girls are fairly comfortable talking to me directly, but they definitely have times where they turn to my husband if they needed to discuss a fear, usually about future progression, or some new symptom they're noticing, because they feel upset me from time to time. Do you find that with your son, Rebecca? Is he more comfortable sometimes discussing things with you that he notices about Larry's situation?
Yes, he will. If he notices something or if he's upset about something, he will usually kind of run it past me first before making up his mind about what's really happening or how he should kind of read the situation and whether it's important to bring it up or not. But he also, my son and my husband have a really open communication relationship as well. So, and
Mhm.
my son is not shy. for anybody who's ever seen him on anything. So he often will just go directly and say something to Larry. But yes, that definitely has happened where there's a little diversion for
Right.
just for comfort level.
Right. Yeah, that's what I find as well in our household.
Yeah.
The second point on
Well,
this one. Oh, go ahead.
and you have three kids to your last point on this slide. You have three daughters. I have one, and it's hard enough to try to manage his understanding. It's parenting, but also, just his understanding, his relationship with the Parkinsons in the family. So with three girls, how was that kind of figuring out how to communicate with all of them and keep that going?
Yeah, it's an interesting time. To have three girls and be a mother is you have to have a thick skin anyway, but but and I'm sure parents that are on this call that have multiple kids know how each child is really different and that a blanket approach is not always the best approach. You have to tailor your approach to the child's temperament, their personality, their level of understanding, the type of relationship that they have with you otherwise. And I've certainly had to approach this disease differently, to your point, with each of my three daughters. The main issues, the general approach we talked about just before this, has been pretty much the same, but there are definitely subtle differences. In my situation, for example, they differ in the way they communicate. One is very relaxed, jokes are fine with her. If, she'll come up to me and say, "What's shaking?" And I'll say, "Anything else besides your mother?" And, she's very kind of lighthearted. She's obviously also has a lot of empathy, but she takes out a communication to be more lighthearted. One is a lot more serious about the way she talks to me about Parkinson's issues, and she doesn't find the lighthearted way that her sisters may communicate. She's not comfortable with that. So again, you have to tailor your communication with them according to what the child is like. They may differ in the way they react to the changes that they see. Always in our case, we've been lucky. They've always reacted with empathy, but still one or two may be more stressed than the other, depending on what's going on in their own life as well. And they also have different opinions. That's why when I said you have to have a thick skin, those have because they're very vocal about those opinions on what they see and then what they witness about this disease. I've never been comfortable with vocalizing my issues on a daily basis, and the three girls still see obviously the changes that happen. But I'm a little bit more closed with sharing my daily complaints, a bit stubborn as well as to get help when I probably need the help. I tend to push myself. So one of my daughters accepts that as being that is who I am. That's who Mama is, and just takes it at that, regardless of my reasoning. The other one understands my motivation and the need to try and sort things out for myself first. And my third daughter is more upset that I don't ask for help when the situation arises, that she feels I'm pushing myself for no good reason. So again, living in the same household, witnessing the same things, but approach and communication are very different between the three girls. So yeah,
Challenging. Yeah.
challenging, but lovely in terms of
Yep.
results. Yeah.
Yep.
So these are sort of the basic things that have personally helped me navigate this topic with my girls who are now 26, 23, soon to be 24, and 19, soon to be 20. So time flies by incredibly
Yep.
quickly. Yeah.
True. We do have a question that's related to something on the previous slide where we're talking about how we're talking with our children about it, what we share, the timing of it, and everything. We have a question that comes in that says, should I share to my kids when I'm feeling anxious?
Hmm.
Do you want to respond to
That's
that?
that's a really good question. Anxiety is something I feel as well. And often for me, it's at night, which makes it difficult to sleep. So anxiety is definitely a symptom that I myself experience. When the kids were younger, I didn't feel comfortable sharing it with them. They had all the social pressures at school. They had all the, school achievement, academics pressures on their mind, and I didn't want to sort of add to that pressure. So in my house, that worked well. That I kind of confided in my husband and dealt with it sort of between the two of us. And when they're much younger, they just simply wouldn't really understand. But as I've grown older and have come into young adulthood, I certainly do share with them my anxiety, for sure. And when they get to a certain age, and again, it's not necessarily age as in a number, but when they get to a certain maturity level, then they appreciate that confiding in them about
Yeah.
certain things. I might not go into all the details, but I certainly have found a kind of sweet spot in which to share with them.
And I think it's really valuable to for our kids learning about about resilience and
Mhm.
how do you face something like this, and for them to see the moments when when things aren't going well, or when you are feeling anxious, or which is a symptom, but also, maybe you're just having a moment of deep grief or sadness about the diagnosis or other things. And so watching you have that full breadth of the experience, the laughter and the tears,
Yes.
they're learning from us as to, how to face that. And if we can show them that it's okay to
Yes.
have all of these reactions and emotions, and also the anxiety and depression that are part of the Parkinson's,
Yeah,
and acknowledging the difference between that, I think there's so much to be learned there.
absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that showing them the reality is really important, but the degree to which you share is dependent on the
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. Great point.
Are there any other questions, Rebecca, for me?
Let me see. There is another question. Let me see if it's related to this. Okay, so when you're talking with your kids, do you recommend working and you're introducing and kind of having this communication with your kids about Parkinson's? Do you recommend working with a family counselor or therapist for family support? And this is not sure if this will make things easier for discussion or not. And this person is curious about our thoughts on that.
Why don't you go first?
I think it's valuable. We personally have not used it. Larry and I both see a counselor separately, but we haven't used it with Henry. He has also seen a counselor separately, and she knows about this, and so has talked with him about it, and that has been very useful. We haven't used it as a family too, and I know that some counselors will be offered to be involved in the conversation to help navigate that, or at least maybe talk to you beforehand so that you have ideas for how to do that. I think that can be a really valuable resource. We haven't used it again in those conversations, but we have separately used them and all benefited from it in our joint conversations for sure.
Right. Yeah, I agree completely. I think their counselors can be a valuable resource in this situation, but it depends on how your family communicates in general. If you feel you're able to handle the kind of conversation that will ensue and the questions that are needed to be answered, then sometimes you don't need that extra help. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with seeing a counselor to help navigate anything in life, let alone a conversation
Yeah,
like this.
you're here. Those are all the questions we have so far.
Okay, so maybe we can go on to the next part, which is related to this. It's just about parenting with Parkinson's disease. I mean, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a mother. I love children and felt so blessed to have those three healthy daughters that I had, all within the first few years of my diagnosis. And even though I couldn't know any deeper love and adoration for these tiny human beings, I couldn't at the same time, there was this cloud of fear hanging over me, and I couldn't help but worry, would I be physically there to look after them? Would I be there for all their milestones as they journeyed from childhood to young adulthood? Would I be there to help them and guide them? Or would I be a burden? And this was a very real fear that I had, particularly at the beginning of my time with them. And these were these thoughts were really overwhelming for a period of time. And even though a great deal of introspection has gone into this topic and experience and it's led me to a much more optimistic outlook. These fears still do surface from time to time. But overall, and like in many other instances, I've learned from this disease, as challenging as it can be. And here are a few caveats on the slide that have helped me parent these girls while dealing with this disease. The first is redefining what a good parent means to you. And this was really, really life-changing for me because I had very high expectations of myself to be a super mom. But what was the definition is what I had to change. What did that term mean? Was it based primarily on my physical ability to parent? Did it depend on my ability to drive them to every practice, to drive them to every event, to hike and bike and play every game with them that they proposed? Would I be inadequate if they're sometimes better at coloring in the lines than I was, or that they had to go to my husband to have their nails painted because I couldn't do it? Did that make me an inadequate patient, person, mother? And of course, those types of experience add to your relationship, but it isn't the goal of successful parenting. I've come to that conclusion in my mind anyway. I think the goal of successful parenting is really to raise well-adjusted, independent, compassionate individuals with the core character traits and moral values that will allow them to be a positive force in this world. That really speaks to me as a successful parent. And that's all while providing them with a safe and loving and supportive environment to reach that potential. That seems to be a much more important objective. And I know this privilege really doesn't rely on your physical abilities alone. So that's one thing I've learned. The second thing I've learned is how to reevaluate how to do things. Undoubtedly, the unpredictability and limitations of this disease will lead to frustration at times. That is absolutely true. Being limited, particularly when it's not your choice to be limited, can be a difficult thing to take and to accept. But taking a proactive role is really important. Taking a proactive approach to creating a super supportive network of individuals that can help you navigate this journey is really important, I found. Creating your own village, I guess, of trustworthy, dependable, and supportive individuals that will help you with taking some care of some of the practical things. Sometimes you have to hand responsibility over, such as taking your child for a play date or picking up your children from school and so forth. And although, as I said, it's sometimes difficult, you have to accept that things may take more time than previously. You may have to modify some activities because of physical limitations, but that doesn't lessen your abilities to make you a make you a less effective parent. I think we have to accept that as well. The next thing is don't let guilt impact your parenting. And I think it's only natural to feel a certain degree of guilt when it comes to parenting in general. Particularly when you live with a chronic illness like Parkinson's disease that often limits your ability to participate in the day. And sometimes that has to do with our own insecurities and perceived impact we have on our children. But I know I felt guilty with my daughters, not wanting my illness to sort of already add to the experience they face, like at school and as they try and shape their futures. I'm sure I've let an extra treat slip by or allow the TV to stay on a bit longer than normal from time to time just to calm my guilt for a missed trip to the park or a movie left unseen. But although the guilt is real sometimes, I've come to the conclusion that it's not a healthy motivating force. In my own experience, I've found in our house anyway, that a child's sense of security comes from being in a loving environment with enough structure, though, to help guide their behavior and development. And they need parents to be a soft place to fall, but not necessarily a pushover. I don't know if that's something you've found as well, Rebecca.
I think that's just really solid parenting advice. And I know that feeling guilty as a person with Parkinson's, I'm not a person with Parkinson's, but I know that's part of Larry's experience. And thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that as well, because I'm guessing there are a lot of YOPD parents out there that can identify with that. There are things you just can't do. There are things you can't do in that moment. There are ways that you can't be available exactly when they need you. So I understand that reaction, but to not let it impact, and so that you are giving too big a gifts or really saying yes to too many things and all of those things that come down to really practical decisions. I think that's just really good, solid parenting advice to maintain that balance.
Yeah, it's sometimes a difficult balance to maintain, though. I must admit that.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
And so that, I guess, leads to the last one, second last one, recognizing that every life experience can be a teaching moment. And you actually alluded to that earlier. And I often say his disease has really taught my girls compassion and empathy for others and the importance of charity. I think this experience presents us as parents an opportunity to impart the importance of these values, both through our open dialogue and empowering them with the knowledge how to make a difference. And ultimately, as you mentioned, they watch us in our daily struggles and how we deal with them. They will learn that life really is not always perfect, and that's an important lesson to learn. There will be unexpected issues that rise, hopefully different than mine in their lives, but it's how they face those challenges that arise that will really define the type of person that they are. And so that teaching moment that life is not perfect, I think is an important one for any child to understand so that they're prepared for the challenges that life will inevitably bring into each of our existences. What have you found? Have you found that to be true that, a lot of your teaching moments come from Larry's and your experience with this disease?
Very much so. Lots of opportunity um, for him to build empathy, understanding, and curiosity, and an acknowledgement of what disability means and how to function, and how to watch out for others, and be nurturing and aware of your surroundings, and which can be a struggle for my son sometimes. But the Parkinson's forces that lesson on him, because he needs to be better aware of his surroundings, especially when he's near Larry, but also helping to be aware of Larry's surroundings. So the issues regarding balance or tripping, or his walking can be an issue for Larry as well. That just paying attention to the details. It's just there, the list is long of all the opportunities. And I think it's really important to acknowledge the benefits that, people with Parkinson's and care partners talk about it a lot. Well, yes, these are struggles, but what do you have in your life, or what have you learned from, and what are the things that are the benefits of having the Parkinson's in your life now? And it's the same for our children. They're getting benefits and being exposed to things and meeting people and traveling and all these other things that likely wouldn't have happened without Parkinson's being in his life. Now, him recognizing that all the time is not always true, but definitely over time, I'm sure that will become more clear. And what a gift!
What a gift, right? The gift that keeps on taking.
Yes,
is how Michael J. Fox describes it.
Yes.
The last point on this list is something I'd like you to tackle, actually, Rebecca. Co-parenting dynamics can change, especially for the person without PD. Do you want to delve into that?
Yeah, this is something that co-parents and care partners talk about a bit I've seen it over and over again, where a lot of frustration can stem from, and where a lot of the transition into having a household that has Parkinson's in it, where a lot of that transition comes when you have younger kids, and that you are actively parenting on a regular basis, where the co-parenting duties, where it may have been, as in our family, it was quite equal prior to the Parkinson's being in the family, that dynamic has shifted a bit, simply for practical reasons. It goes fully in the Parkinson's bucket, where there are just ways that Larry can't be as present when he's off, or when he's having a bad day, when he's busy, when he needs all of his energy for other things, because those are taking his energy away, so he has less energy for parenting, and for the family. And that's a challenging aspect of being a co-parent with people with Parkinson's. And so I don't, and there's no real solution that's universal. It's just acknowledging, I guess, that's something that has definitely affected our family. It is a point of frustration, even as I recognize that thing that he can't do anymore, that way that he's less present or less available for that parenting duty. Even when I acknowledge that fully is because of his Parkinson's, it's still frustrating. And so acknowledging that that's just part of the experience, and then taking breaths or using my tools or whatever I need to do in order to continue to be resilient and move forward with whatever we're dealing with in that moment. So I guess it's just acknowledging it and saying you're not alone. That is a frustration, and I don't know that there's a blanket solution for that.
Right, but how
asking for help, although I do want to say, and it just came to me, asking for help and acknowledging it having open communication with your person with Parkinson's regarding that, keeping that communication open, adjusting the practical things that you need to adjust, and then asking for help when you need it. I suppose if there's any advice, if that might apply, that's what I would offer.
Makes good sense. But Rebecca, how do you take care of yourself? Because it is tiring physically and emotionally to take on more of the day-to-day primary caregiver for your son. So how do you take care of yourself?
I It has been a struggle, and I know that the word self-care, people, care partners are especially really tired of hearing it. So whatever word works for you, self-care or caring for yourself or making time for yourself or whatever it may be, survival tactics. That's another way to say it. I have prioritized that and have had to learn to prioritize that. But I have a toolbox of things that I do: taking a walk, being in nature, writing, creative expression, music, social time with other people, whether they're care partners or not. All of these things are kind of in my self-care toolbox. And then just having a mindset of that, where my time is also priority, my time is important, and my health and well-being is also important.
Mhm.
And able to kind of, so that I am continuously taking care of myself, breaking the stress response cycle, and able to move forward and be resilient in that parenting role. And it's not always easy, and some days I'm a lot better at it than others. But there, so I can't claim to be really good at it every day, but that's my intention, and that's the answer to your question.
Right. Great.
How do you take care of yourself and your symptoms? As parenting on its own is really hard, and then you're dealing with the Parkinson's symptoms too on top of that. So how do you manage your symptoms in that way, and also kind of balance that with the parenting?
I'm really bad at it.
Yeah.
I'll preface it by that. My family thinks I'm really
Honesty.
bad at it, and I now admit I'm really bad at it. But that having been said, there are certain things that are non-negotiable for me that I do to take care of myself. And that the first thing and topmost thing is trying to get regular exercise. I think that's been a really good outlet for me, and it keeps my symptoms a little bit more manageable. So for me, the exercise key has been key. The
Yes.
other thing is my mental health and taking time to read inspirational books or to, meditate from time to time. I'm really bad at it. I can never keep my mind quiet,
Yeah.
but I try, is important as well. And the other key is being involved with caring for other things. Like my advocacy work helps take the focus
Yeah.
off of myself. Caring for my girls, that helps take the focus off myself. Also socializing. I think it's very, very easy, especially if you have anxiety and depression associated with this disease or your symptoms are worse. It's very easy to become socially isolated and with this condition. But for myself, socializing with either people in this community or, just in my larger social circle has been really important as well. And keeps my outlook as positive as possible.
Wonderful. We have a question before we move on that I think is a more detailed question that I would love for you to answer, Sonia, because it applies to you. So, were you diagnosed with Parkinson's before or after your children? If before, can you talk about how or if it affected breastfeeding? And then there's another follow-up question about breast milk and medication. But I know that you were diagnosed prior to giving birth and raising your children, right?
Yeah.
So that if do you have any insight into that?
Yes, I did. I was expecting my first child when I was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's disease. So I was about 28 at the time. And then I went on to have two more after that. At that time, there was very little understanding of what this disease was like in women, particularly of childbearing age. And I was very early, as I said, I was diagnosed at the same time as my first pregnancy. So I minimized my exposure to any medication as much as I could throughout all three pregnancies. When it came to breastfeeding, I did pretty much the same because people couldn't really tell me what to do. There just wasn't the information out there. I wish I could say that there's a lot more information out there, but there really isn't. We know that there are certain medications that are okay to be taking probably during pregnancy and breastfeeding, such as dopamine replacement, for instance. But that can sometimes also affect your breast milk supply. But there are certain medications that are not recommended, such as amantadine, for instance, is not recommended during pregnancy. But I would basically say check with your own physician because your own situation may be different. You might be a high risk pregnancy or or your health may be different than mine was. But so I don't mean to give out medical advice. I just say there are certain drugs that you can take that are okay to take during pregnancy and breastfeeding. And there are certain drugs that are not okay to take that we know can be harmful, but that all needs to be discussed in your own contacts with your own physician in order to make that determination. And yeah, each of my pregnancies was treated differently. The first one was nothing. There was no issues. They didn't do anything. The second one was like all hands on deck. Everyone was in the delivery room, and the neonatal ICU was there. Everybody was freaking out. And the third one went back to, we'll monitor you for a little bit longer, but we're not too worried about it. So that actually just speaks to the lack of knowledge that we have when it comes to women in Parkinson's disease more than anything else.
Yeah, agreed. And luckily they're making some strides on that also. And your work is contributing to that a lot as well. A quick follow-up that I'm not sure your answer, so I'm gonna read it and see what you have to say. It says, are you aware of any medications that support breast milk production while taking Cinnamate? And then Cinnamate is a dopamine agonist and dopamine blocks prolactin. So I'm guessing then is it more difficult to produce breast milk if you are? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I meant. It can affect breast milk supply.
Got it.
But fortunately, the other medication that helps sometimes with breast milk feeding may aggravate your symptoms. So it's a very fine balance that you have to have in terms of when it comes to breast milk feeding. It's really an individual thing that you need to individually discuss.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sonia. So is that our last slide?
It is.
Yes. Okay, great. So now it's like, okay, we're 47 after the hour. So now why don't we have our reveal for our cloud, our poll question word cloud coming up. Okay, yeah. So the question was, for anyone coming in late, what is the most prominent emotion you feel when you think about your experience parenting as a person with Parkinson's or as a co-parent? And we're seeing pride, sadness and loss, challenging, guilt, fear, future, and with. I don't know if and then am I seeing longer?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, longer, challenging, maybe together. Yeah. So, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and right. And I don't see any more prominent than another. They're all coming up quite equally.
Mm-hmm.
But pride, I'm happy that came up as well. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, we're gonna be parenting for a long time with this disease in our family. Yes, absolutely, to the sadness and the loss, because we're feeling it. So we know our children are feeling it, and it is affecting our environment. The ideas of sadness and loss and kind of that cyclical grief process that Parkinson's presents because it's progressive. And so the full breadth of emotions were kind of, what's your reaction to the word cloud?
Yeah, no, I've been probably through every one of those feelings time and time again. And I think it's okay to be sad about it because there has been a change from what you were normally expecting. What your expectations were have to change. And that can sometimes be sad, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to grieve a little bit. But trying then to reframe it so that you see the possibilities within this experience, that you see the possibilities of teaching, if you see the possibilities of changing your own attitude, because when you try and be optimistic for your child, for instance, some of that rubs off. When you see their optimistic outlook on the situation that you may not have, that rubs off on you. So we can learn from our children just as much in this experience, actually, as much as they learn from us. But sort of seeing
Yes.
the opportunities in the experience, I think, is important to focus on eventually. But it's okay to feel sad. That's normal. We should
I
grant
think
ourselves.
that's a great point that we are learning from our children, and this is in this as much as they're learning from us and our child's and children's reactions to the disease and just life and whatnot. That's parenting, but also with this particular kind of challenge that they're dealing with that most people at that young age are not dealing with. We're
Right.
learning from their reaction to it. My son can find silliness in anything. He can find a way to laugh and
Yeah.
find the light side of things. And Larry's kind of like that as well.
Right.
But Henry's just kind of naturally silly and funny and goofy, and he embraces that. And it's a huge part of who he is. And
Right.
so even when we're feeling those things, yes, and you can also feel, find a place of silliness and laughter and joy and kind of embracing all of it together, to your point, and allowing all of those emotions, and then our kids being able to kind of model that for us when we get mired in our adult way of being, which may be a little bit more cynical because
Yeah.
right, it's a more cynical view of the world because we've been exposed to more of it than they have. So
Yeah.
yeah, allowing ourselves to let our kids bring us into the silliness of it all. Love that.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the issue can be is that sometimes we get so fearful of our future that we really miss the present. And those little gems with our kids come up, on a daily basis in the present. And I think that's really important not to miss out on.
Yeah, agreed. Do we have any other questions coming from now is a great time to pose any questions or send any questions along, or any comments if you just like to add to the conversation. We would love to hear from you. So please feel free to kind of to voice your opinion or what you've maybe something that you've learned from going through the parenting experience with Parkinson's. Okay, here's a question. What's your attitude towards genetic testing? So I guess fearing that if there's a gene that's being passed on to our kids, if you have kids already, or maybe if you're considering having kids.
Right. I think genetic testing is something that I underwent when I found out my diagnosis. I don't hold any of the known mutations, but it's a very personal decision because some people want to know because they feel that that information is important to them in order to guide the way they self-care or the way they seek treatment. Other people don't want to know because it would add a stress to them in terms of their children's health as well. And I think it's a very personal decision. The thing is with this type of genetic testing, one, if you have the gene, you don't know if you will necessarily or your child will necessarily develop the gene or develop the disease. So a positive genetic test does not mean disease, does not equate disease. And the second thing is, if you know you're positive and at risk for it, what can you do to prevent it from happening? That would be a reason to do it as well. And we don't have any disease modifying treatments as of yet to be able to offer to people that are high risk for this disease. So because of those two things, I think it's a very personal decision as to whether anyone decides to do genetic testing. What I would say is that if you do go that route, and I would encourage anyone to seek an opinion from a geneticist when they're trying to make that decision. I think that's a very helpful person to have this discussion with based on your history, based on your family's history. They'd be best able to advise you on whether or not to go ahead with genetic testing. And I think that counseling pre and post test is really important to interpret the findings of the genetic test if you have to go to it. So that's another member of your care team that can be very valuable when you're in the childbearing years as a genetics
Great.
specialist.
Great. Thank you, Sonia. We do have a comment, and it looks like a question as well. So maybe part of my father's very masculine, tough guy personality, but my father has always hid his health problems, including Parkinson's, not accepting help or support from the kids or sharing details with us. I think to try to protect us. do we have any thoughts on how parenting with Parkinson's can face challenges when those parents with Parkinson's can face challenges when those personality traits are in play?
Very good question.
Right? I know that's
Yeah.
a great question. And
Yeah.
I do want to say, and maybe this is an opportune time, when we did this session live in Barcelona,
Hmm.
there was a person who spoke who was an adult child of
Hmm.
a person with Parkinson's, and he expressed that it was very, very difficult for him
Hmm.
because he felt that his father wasn't great at communicating. There were various reasons, but he had a really hard time with it, and was still kind of seeking answers about those things. And so maybe it's important for us to acknowledge that, um, even with the best of parenting, even with the best of intentions, because everybody's doing the best that they can,
Of course.
this is still going to affect our kids long term in a lot of positive ways that we've talked about, but also in some challenging ways, and kind of have forced them to process things on their own regarding the Parkinson's.
Absolutely. I think it also, I mean, people that don't want to share, sometimes it can just be a personality thing. They've never really wanted to share much with their children, which is fine. Absolutely. I think sometimes it also comes from lack of emotional acceptance of the disease. I certainly went through a lot of years of intellectual acceptance of my disease. I knew I had the disease, but I really didn't emotionally accept it for a good 10 years, I think, where I was able to then discuss it with other people and talk about it with other people openly because I had sort of come to that emotional acceptance myself. So I think that's something that may be going on. And sometimes it's out of fear. If you're fearful of what this disease is, then that can get translated in you not wanting to put that fear on your children as well.
Yeah.
And the way to handle it is very difficult. I mean, you can only be there as be open, make sure that they know that you understand their situation and that you're there for whenever they're ready to speak about the situation. And sometimes it might be as simple as saying, "Hey, Dad, can I come with you to your next appointment? Because I want to know what's going on with you." And sometimes they may allow that to happen, in which case you can get more objective information from their care provider if they're okay with that. But it's a tough one. It's a tough
Yeah,
one.
that's a tough question. Yeah, thank you for posing that. I think that's important to talk about. We have a couple more questions, but I think we really only have time for one more. Um, yeah, so these two questions are related. It's about kind of well, I'll read the first question. Have any children at your kids' school ever pointed out anything about you or said anything to your kids about you? If so, how did you handle that? That's something I'm wary of that may happen in the future. And this person has a 1-year-old son.
Right,
And then the other one is related to that. Have your children faced any adversity from other children at school due to your diagnosis?
right.
Do you want to?
And yeah, in my personal case, it's been pretty smooth sailing from that perspective because I've been in the community and very open about my diagnosis. So the teachers are often aware of our family situation and also my kids. When they were in elementary school, like the younger grades 3 and 4, I went into their class each year that they were at that age for all three daughters. And I gave a little talk and then sort of we took balls and said, this is dopamine, you're a neuron, you pass the ball along, just sort of educating them about Parkinson's disease um, at that age. And they were in a private school, so the same cohort kind of went with them. They also did things through their school, like they had a Pennies for Parkinson's where they raised money for Parkinson's disease research and that sort of thing. So in my personal case, no, but I can see that being, and that's where I alluded to the embarrassment, because I think that
Mhm.
is only a normal, natural reaction sometimes for kids to have. That can happen, I'm sure. But I think it's a matter of educating your child so that they have the means by which they can approach those situations should they happen.
Right. And normalizing it, I think, too,
Normalize it.
because Henry has faced that a little bit when seeing Larry.
Hmm.
Now, we are a different race from him. So there are lots of questions that that the kids usually have about that. But if they did notice a weird movement or a weird walk or something, then he would say that. But because Henry's so normalized about it, and the way that we reacted to is very normal, like, well, why are you walking funny? If for really young kids who are super straightforward and will ask anything, why are you walking funny? Because he has Parkinson's. And if you have any question, that means sometimes he walks funny or he shakes or whatever, but it's, he's okay. And then, oh, okay. And most kids will just kind of, move along. And as long as you're normalizing it with them, but that's just one very specific situation. There are probably a myriad of ways to handle that. So thank you for that. But we are at the top of the hour, so we do need to wrap up. Thank you, everybody. What a great discussion. And thank you so much to Dr. Sonia Mather. And thank you to you all for joining us here today. I hope this session serves as a reminder that none of us is alone in these challenges. We are all doing the best that we can, and no parent is perfect. It's important to acknowledge that parenting is hard, and parenting while facing Parkinson's multiplies those challenges. We're human, we will make mistakes, and we also will have brilliant moments of connection and love. So be easy with yourselves. And remember, you have the resilience to forgive the foibles and move forward. And so do your children. So thank you for being here for yourselves, your co-parents, and your children. Few quick reminders regarding the YOPD virtual as a whole. Be sure to download the resource page that we've put for this session in the resource tab. It does have some of the books that Sonia was mentioning, as well as some really great links to some organizations worldwide that can help you and offer some information regarding talking to them, but also just parenting in general with Parkinson's. And a quick reminder that all talks have been recorded and will be available for viewing next week. We hope you will share this information with friends or support groups who may like to view these talks on their own time. Thank you again to Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma America for supporting this program. And one last thing before we sign off, we want to invite you to save the date for the 7th World Parkinson Congress that will run May 24th to 27th, 2026 in Phoenix, Arizona in the States. It's just once every 3 years, but it's always a blast. And the next one promises to be quite amazing as well. So we hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions today and the rest of the Congress.